said, this is Tamara and I'm JP.
Yeah.
And
we were talking yesterday that actually this workshop started as a conversation between the two of us. And we were thinking that today it's probably going to just feel like a continuation of that conversation, except that we get to invite all of you into it. This is something that we are both very passionate about, working with people in sort of non-medical model, non-conventional therapeutic settings, and assuming many of you are here because that's also what you do, or maybe what you would like to do. So, yeah.
So we already discussed who we were, so we're just going to jump into it. So this is a little bit of, what is your experience? And if you would just, check in with yourself and about these questions that we've prepared for you. Do you have experience working in non-traditional, unconventional therapeutic environments? Just think about it, and also what unconventional therapeutic environments means to you. What do you think it is? And it's also interesting to understand what drew you to this workshop and why you're here and not in another workshop. And what you'd like to receive from this workshop. I think it's really important to understand that we might not be able to fulfill all that. If you use the word street compassion for that, that's a really nice way to put it. So unconventional therapeutic environments refers to the places like homeless shelters, just the streets. My friend and I were in a very, very bad neighborhood yesterday to check out what's going on there. And when you walk around there with a lot of compassion inside you, there's no fear. There's a different thing that you're looking at. So it's, instead of being like this, you could just walk around and be compassionate, empathetic about what's going on there, and anywhere where people face significant challenges. And
can I mention something? So also, this workshop started to formulate my mind at the last conference in Vancouver, because a few of the facilitators wanted to go down to the east side where where CI, started to form for Gabor, even though he says it was a number of different things in his experience. So I went down there, and I've worked with homeless youth for a long time in the homeless population, and I have people in my personal life that are very near and dear to me who are street drug users, who have been homeless, still are homeless, and so I know a lot about the street culture as well as drug use. And we were walking through, I don't know if anyone's been there, but it's just like block and block and block and block and block of people literally occupying the sidewalks with tents and blankets and using crack and fentanyl and crystal meth out in the open, and et cetera, et cetera. And after about 10 minutes of this walk, one of the facilitators said to me, so are they smoking crack? And I realized, I was like, wow, like I actually know what people are using. And I know, and I started to think, okay, so this is a particular knowledge and experience that I have combined with CI that can be very useful. And then JP and I started talking, and yeah, here we are. So we had a couple of quotations that were meaningful to us. If we could begin to see much illness itself not as a cruel twist of fate or some nefarious mystery, but rather as an expected and therefore normal consequence of abnormal, unnatural circumstances, it would have revolutionary implications for how we approach everything health-related. And that's sort of similar to what you're saying. We did not plan that, by the way. That was completely spontaneous.
I work as a hospital chaplain, and when I'm on evening duties, I do rounds in the emergency department. And so the difference in that, and I think the other unconventional settings, are that people are not coming to me, I'm going to them. So I have issues around consent with using CI that I'm trying to work through. But usually the emergency department is people with addiction, drug use, homeless, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Would you also like to elaborate a little bit just about, what it is that are the results coming from that? What are some of the results?
I think people expect to not feel seen, and it's really powerful when they do. They expect to not to be judged, and and they may be immediately afterwards by medical staff. I never know, but it just being present. Like there's really nothing I can do in the short amount of time I have with them other than just be present.
Yeah. So thank you. I have some knowledge. I bring something to the table. I pull up a mirror, or I show something out of my bag. And it makes people feel heard and seen. And so what you then see is that people start getting curious. Immediately, the shift is taking place as well. So you can see first they come in and they're a little anxious, and there's all kinds of different things and like that. But the minute you start talking to them and express that the way that you feel about life and yourself in the situation, how you see them, it provides curiosity for them. So now they're in a different setting, and now they walk with you, and they're like asking questions, and you sit down with them, have a drink or something like that. So it's a completely different way or a different approach as opposed to some of the more traditional ways that people might conduct that.
Yeah, and what I love about that is it tends to disrupt the ingrained and familiar roles that people play of receiver of services and giver of services. So it then also disrupts the power dynamic, which is really important because that has to do with safety and so many other things. Also, to the first part, seeing people for the pain. So actually, I started a youth center in 2010 just because there wasn't one in our city, and we had the highest national rate of unemployment at the time. And so I thought, we need one, and I just did it, but I didn't know anything about what I was doing, which was actually a good thing because I came to the situation, I think, from a more human perspective rather than a social services perspective, which can, already filter out certain human elements at times. But it was actually Gabor's book, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, that was the first official thing that I had access to that actually reflected my experience working with people who are really, really marginalized, especially street drug users. And I remember reading about his first day, I think, and he was led up some stairs and someone was trying to inject in their neck, and his response was to just show them how to do that in a safer, less harmful way. And I thought, oh my God, like, who is this man? Like, it was literally, the drink of water that I had in what seemed to be, which is also important. I learned a lot about my perceptions, but seemed to be a desert of compassion in the field. So that was really important.
Yeah. So this is a very good quote, and you might want to speak to it. So our other core need is authenticity. Definitions vary, but here's the one I think applies best to this discussion: the quality of being true to oneself and the capacity to shape one's own life from a deep knowledge of that self. And actually, who would like to say something about this?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So what comes up for me is that self has a very, very deep compassion. And I can only talk about my own experience when I started into this journey of being more true to myself. Then I entered that new compassion, and it was the more I was getting true, I needed compassion. So I think that self has this compassion, and it's enough for the whole world. So that's coming up for me, compassion, the self. Yeah, I don't know.
No,
Thank you.
thank you so much for that. Yeah, absolutely.
Hi. So what really comes up for me here is like the difference between someone who walks into my clinic and pays me money that might have had like years of therapy already and like will really understand some of the things I'm asking them, the inquiry. And then some people that I work with who, like I run a bursary project and work for an NGO, and we offer like free services to our community, and it's rural. So there's a lot of poverty and people who've never, ever, ever even thought about having therapy before. And so like when then that person walks through my door, and it's the same door as someone else who walks through because they've had a bursary, then the way that I approach that person is very, very different. And sometimes that can be really challenging for me because, and I've learned had to really inquire into my own process because I really need to, take a lot more time and slow down and really listen to where that person is because they've never done this before.
Yeah.
And they don't know, and there's a lot of layers really within that. So it's just something to notice for myself that's been really helpful and ongoing process for me. So.
That was going to be my follow-up question to you. What did you notice in terms of the effect of that situation for you?
Yeah, it's a really good question because I think initially it brought up, oh gosh, I'm, not doing this very well, and that whole kind of narrative.
Core belief.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then also just to kind of get support around it and set up some mentoring and supervision, and particularly when working with, I suppose I can only talk to my own experience. Within poverty, there's not much homelessness where I live, but there is very, very extreme poverty and therefore lots of chronic conditions, and people like living with, illness for a really, really, really long time, and lots of unemployment and that kind of thing, what can come with it, multi-generational, being on benefits, and so for me, just being able to be in spaces where I can share those things and talk to other people who've had similar experiences and ask questions, and then take, have my own supervision. So I suppose, looking at my own core beliefs so that I can come into those spaces and be really present and sit back a little bit and really listen, because for a lot of those people, they've never shared anything ever. So that could be, so beginning with a deep inquiry is perhaps not the best approach at first. So, just giving space to them.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
For that.
So Gabor says that safety is not the absence of threat, but the presence of connection. That is so important. I think that is really the most important thing that I can think of. When I go to work, I'm trying to, it's not always successful. I try to ground myself. So I'm connected to my past, I'm connected to the present, and I'm connected to the future in an energetic way, So when I step into my office, or it's not an office, but when I step into the facility, I'm trying to be that centered person, the authentic person, with my own limitations to that knowledge and understanding of myself, but still it works because when something happens, people will come to me and they will ask me questions. When you're not grounded, people will, be around you, they try to not connect to you. So, actually, there was a question here. Was that related to some of this or? Okay, so we can go to there. Yeah.
And I don't know if you just said this, but I'm great at doing this with people experiencing homelessness. But when it comes to the authorities, when it comes to the people in power, that's when I go into the correct mode for them because they're wrong and they're part of me that is, protecting the vulnerable or whatever comes out, and it's like, you shouldn't be doing this, and I lose the connection to myself more commonly with the agencies and those people with the power and the money than I do with the people who are vulnerable.
That's very interesting, right? I mean, you're trying to correct people and therefore losing connection to yourself, trying to correct yourself, you can see how this becomes like an endless loop of negative energy. Yeah, so breaking out of that is to first understand what it is that drives a person in front of you, right? So if you understand where they're coming from, that's a much easier way to connect, where actually the connection is the way to go, I think. And if the connection is not right there, then that's not the moment. So you go back and you sit there and you lick your wounds, and then you go back in there and like, oh, you know what, this and this happened, and this is how I felt about that. Do you think it's okay that we sit down with that? You know, I don't know if you've all watched the NVZ, the Nonviolent Communications with Anouk yesterday. That's really important to establish the connection in all directions. Yeah.